And welcome everybody to the Daily Space Weather. I'm your host Dan, aka smAsho, and we're looking at the sun here. It's a 48-hour view from the SDO. And you'll see a B-class flare toward the end of the movie there. Let's look at the whole disk. Let that play through a second time. And you can kind of see that solar flare there in that view. By the way, we are streaming the content live to Twitch thanks to our patrons. Whether you're an assistant or associate producer, thanks to our subscribe stars, please consider supporting the content to ensure that it may continue to be free. Next, looking at HelioViewer, here's the fade from 171 angstroms to the magnetic fields. And the sunspot has degraded as we forecasted yesterday. Congratulations to Mary, who also forecasted that this sunspot was degrading. There's the fade to 94 angstroms. And we're going to fade from 94 to 171. An interesting fade there. We usually use 304. And there's the solar ham analysis. And you can see the magnetic mixing has largely ceased up here, as well as back here. So we've got one polarity and two polarity umbrae, making it a beta class sunspot. It has lost its delta designation. Next, looking at the full disk view here in 131 angstroms. And again, this is a 48-hour view from the SDO, and you can see that B-class flare. And I'll let that play through a second time. It was a significant B-class flare, and it was not associated with any coronal mass ejections, at least that we can currently see. And we're fairly sure of that. We do see a coronal mass ejection building on the non-Earth facing side of the sun. We'll show you in a minute after we look at some custom HelioViewer movies. And there you can see a good view of that flare in 94 angstroms. We'll let that play through a second time so you get a second look at it. And there's that B-class solar flare. Next, we'll look at this exact same view of the south solar polar region in 171 angstroms, my personal favorite wavelength. You'll see that flare erupt right there. And a great view of the South Pole as well. Not a lot going on, but we do see an elevated solar wind speed. So last night we saw the KP index get all the way up to 4, and our patrons would already know that as we send our patrons various different alerts long before we make videos for places like YouTube. 10.7 centimeter radio flux has come up to 73, and that's a good thing, as solar minimum are bad. They're bad for society and bad for people's health, as you may have noticed. Now, looking at the countdown to the solstice, it's telling me that we are currently in the 4 hottest weeks, at least in terms of solar radiation input in the Northern Hemisphere. Because we're less than 2 weeks from the solstice, we will be streaming live for the solstice on Facebook, YouTube, and on Twitch. So we'll have 3 live streams going all at once. So tune into the Solstice Stream 2020. And we'll feature call-ins on the Solstice Stream also. If you'd like to reach us at any time, actually, you can call or text us at 610-936-9799. And if you'd like to set up your own VoIP line on your smartphone, try talkatone.com. You can download their app. It's totally free. It'll give you a second phone line within your smartphone, and it'll give you access to being able to use your phone to call and text when you only have internet access and no cell phone access, for instance, when you're in a bunker. All right, next, looking at the location of planets and so on in the solar system as Venus has swung past. There's where things will be in a week as Earth approaches this Jupiter-Saturn-Mars conjunctive zone. And the moon heads on its way to another new moon. We're only going to talk about one article today on the cosmology segment, so let's keep it brief. And it's about exoplanets. There's a reason why I don't typically cover exoplanets very much on these videos, and it is because I find the study to be silly. It is important to study exoplanets, okay, because they involve stellar behavior, and there are different ways to find and analyze exoplanets. When we say exoplanets, we're talking about planets outside the solar system. So typically what we see with an exoplanet is this kind of a scenario, where you have a very erratically behaving red dwarf star, which is kind of cold and kind of dark, and you'll have an Earth planet in the habitable zone, which is at a much closer distance to a red dwarf star. Red dwarf stars have a tendency to suddenly send out huge stellar ejections, and that's not a good sign for life on the planets. And then you've also got these Neptune-sized stars, which are typically inside of the habitable zone. They're actually too close to have liquid water on the surface. And then you've got these sort of planets that are around larger, brighter stars. They're a little on the cold side. So typically, the easiest ones to see are gas giants, and it's because of the way the baryonic center of rotation of the star behaves, as well as occultations. When the planet moves in between the Earth and the star, it's going to obscure the light, and that's called an occultation, and the measurement of that obscuration of the light helps to measure it. But this one's interesting here because KOI-456.04 is quite similar to the Sun-Earth system, to the point where people are calling it a mirror image. So this one is less than twice the size of the Earth, and it orbits a sun-like star, and it's at the right orbital distance to perhaps have liquid water. So perhaps read that article if you like. It's on SciTech Daily. Let's move on to more real-time data. Looking at the state of affairs above my head, we see a pile-up up there with the Moon, Jupiter, and Saturn near their apexes. Mars in between the apex and the eastern horizon. And if you get up before dawn, you should be able to see Venus if you have a low eastern horizon. It will be epic. And there's that B-class solar flare we were showing you. It was a 6.4. And again, there was no coronal mass ejection associated with that explosion of photons. X-ray photons. Proton flux, nothing really to write home about there. We've started covering it each day because as we approach solar maximum, we'll probably see some proton fluxes. Some increased proton flux, that is. And we see some shifting of the phi angle here up until just before midnight, and then it kind of stabilized. And you can see this coronal hole wind stream here, the density made it all the way up to 35 protons per cubic centimeter. And then as this ramped down, we see the solar wind ramp up to significant speeds here. We're up all the way up to around 480 kilometers per second. And the solar wind density has ramped down to 5.74 protons per cubic centimeter. Next, looking at the geospace magnetosphere movies. Here's 4 hours of data. And this has calmed down a bit. If you would have seen this when the KP was at 4, you would have seen increased auroral activity and increased pressure in the magnetosphere. And this coronal hole wind stream could last a while here, as it's, when you see densities as high as we saw, up to 35 protons, it could be a long-lasting coronal hole wind stream. Don't be surprised if we go back into geomagnetic unrest, folks. Here's 4 hours of data of ground magnetic perturbations. And we've got a South Pole, which has left the Antarctic continent, and 2 North Poles, one over Siberia, one over Canada. There are the locations of them. You can kind of see it. And let's just move on. There's the GOES magnetometer data. We got to very high levels. It actually expanded the scale here. You can see now the scale's all the way up to 175 nanotesla, having reached a level of all the way up to 143 there. or so, and then having it precipitously drop back down. Next, looking at the Gong 2 data to see we are still solidly in the North Pole current sheet, shown in green, as I've forecasted, and will remain there until and unless that sunspot completely evaporates. I won't get into the magnetohydrodynamics of how this works because it's a daily space weather video, not a cosmology segment. Keep in mind the data is 1 hour and 41 minutes old. Now let's go to stereo A, which is located out here, and it's looking at the sun from this perspective. And we see a coronal mass ejection about to go out in this direction. Check it out. The view from stereo A. A significant coronal mass ejection building up there. And so if you want to watch this throughout the day, this area right here, you're going to see that release. That is way too much plasma to be held by the magnetic shells close to the corona. Don't believe me? Just keep watching the Integrated Space Weather Analysis Center and you'll see that I'm correct. Next, looking at the line of sight field plot. And you can see the B field is getting a little bit distorted over here to the east. And that has to do with the sunspot. Some distortions up here also associated with that active region, former sunspot 2764. Electron fluence is still very low. There's the greater than 2 mega electron volt electron flux. Here's the GOES electron flux, which includes 2 mega electron volts and up, which is basically the same feature, the same figure. But this is a 3-day plot, and you can see quite low levels. This will remain very low throughout the day. No expected increase in the electron flux, at least until a bit after the coronal hole wind stream ends. Here's a total electron content forecast. And we see some anomalies in the ionosphere, and some of those are reflected in this. Check it out. We see an electron flux event down here over Antarctica. I'll let it play through a second time so you see it. Right there. You see a sudden electron flux which kind of goes like this around this region. I'm even going to let it play through a third time here. Also a anomalous electron flux over the Pacific Ocean west of Baja California. So that is a real anomaly there, folks, and that would have caused unexpected GPS errors if you were in Antarctica in those areas. Next looking at the ionosphere, which is also a bit anomalous today. You can see it's getting very discharged on the sun-facing portion. And you can see some evidence of that electron flux event also. And that was the first time we've ever covered an anomaly on the total electron content forecast. So that's a little interesting there. Moving on to earthquakes. So we saw quite a lot of earthquakes actually over the past 24, including this 5.4 magnitude at nearly 100 kilometers depth in western South America. One of the places in the world where we've been seeing countless deep quakes. We didn't see anything over a 6 magnitude, but some quakes quite close to it. So here's a 5.8 at the Solomon Islands. Followed only 7 minutes later by a close-by quake, right at the same place, really. Perhaps just an aftershock there, a 5.8 followed by a 5.7. And just scrolling up the list here, largest of the past 24 was, I believe, this 5.9, which came in at 8:06 p.m. Universal Time at Papua New Guinea. Here's another Western South American quake at depth, 4.8 magnitude, depth 120 kilometers. A 5.0 at Indonesia. And let's do volcanoes. Mount Aso's erupting, 5,000-foot plume there. Tokyo recorded continuous explosive activity from the crater and a near constant gray-white plume that reached 6,000 feet of altitude. Sulfur dioxide emissions reached 1,200 tons a day on June 2nd. I guess that's a lot. I have no idea. Sakurajima, flight level 8,000 there. Mount Ibu, back on the list. 67 volcanotectonic earthquakes reported and an ash plume that rose to about 3,000 feet. Popocatépetl has dispersed the ash, although we still see steam and gas emissions observed at the summit in the webcam. Revenador dispersed its ash clouds, and Sabancaya exploding. Intermittent emissions of volcanic ash have produced a flight level of 25,000 there. Please do not fly your John Denver-style aircraft. Have you gotten sick of the... it is... For you can... All right, that was good. That was pretty cool. And if you're viewing live, please... Oh, thanks for viewing, Ms. Creighton. Nice name, by the way. By the way, if you enjoy the original music that we often feature on the videos, check out soundclick.com/GoldenCat Productions. Let me press refresh and see if we've been charted again. And we are now 29th in the instrumental rock subgenre with Unified Theory. Check it out. So if you want to jump on the bandwagon and listen to the most popular song, that one's on the chart, Unified Theory 3. We used to use it as the intro music. Soundclick.com/GoldenCat Productions. Let's talk about virtue signaling. Well, the virtue signaling on social media has now reached epic proportions. As every celebrity and every company in the world, okay, I'm exaggerating, not everyone, but quite a lot of them are all over social media talking about how they're not racist and how they support social justice and yada, yada, yada. What a joke. Every time somebody has the opportunity to try to cash in on a crisis, they virtue signal and they say, buy our products because we're so social justice oriented. Now, social justice is a term that goes back a long, long time. All the way back to cosmic values with Hunter Lewis and John Rawls and so on. Classical Greek thinkers like Epicurus on the good of pursuing happiness. So anyway, social justice is a term that means all kinds of various things. Whether you're talking about Mao Zedong's social justice programs that killed millions of people in China, or if you're talking about current ridiculous social justice programs that make no sense at all and don't accomplish very much whatsoever, besides making people think that they're doing good, ignoring unintended consequences, and turning up with terrible, 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 ridiculous ideas to do things like make the government bigger to make sure everybody's nice to each other. And let's just move on. Fuji, a prime example of a virtue signaling company. Now, they're a very popular bike manufacturer. If Fuji's your sponsor, sorry to say it, but Fuji has stopped selling bicycles to police forces. Now, these cops here look like they're about to use their Trek police bikes as a weapon. They've created like a wall of police bikes here. Please don't hit me with your bike. I will jump out of the way and you'll just miss. Fuji Bikes has decided to suspend sales because police are weaponizing bikes against protesters. What a crock of shh that is. Oh my gosh, a bike as a weapon. Oh no. A biker gang brutally beat protesters in Philly. And guess what? That ain't cops. This just looks like random idiots with their bikes who rode to the rally, probably because they didn't want to get their car destroyed and burned. Yes, chaos in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. People think that doing stuff like this is going to solve racism and police brutality. And by the way, police are like the smallest fans of police brutality out of everybody. Why? Because it causes increased violence in their workplace, which they don't want to see any more than you do. Let's talk about central banks, which can't cure the coronavirus and can't cure anything. They can't cure the economy. They can't cure inflation because all they do is cause inflation. So end the Fed. The rising tide raises all ships. And if we restored this thing called capitalism, here's the thing, folks. Capitalism is not a thing. You may think capitalism is a thing. You may be anti-capitalism. Well, you've never seen capitalism because capitalism has not existed in the U.S. since 1913 on December 23rd when Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act, creating a monopoly on lending. And I won't get into the Federal Reserve Act, but the point is end the Federal Reserve and create a marketplace for the largest block of business in the world, which is the interest rates on international and corporate loans. The prices are fixed on those loans, folks. It's called the prime lending rate. And every time the Fed adjusts it, you're experiencing government cronyism and a plutocratic corporatocracy. That is not capitalism. A cartel of banks deciding what the prime lending rate will be is corporatism, not capitalism. Anyway, read this article on Zero Hedge about how governments have crippled the world's economies. The world's economies have not been crippled by coronavirus. They haven't been crippled by racism. They haven't been crippled by police brutality. What they've been crippled by is terrible, ridiculous financial activity and government interventionism. So I'll just let the article scroll here, and I'll just continue on because we don't want the video to be too long. Thanks everybody who set up a login at smashamash.com/forum. It's amazing. We're already at 1,238 users. And wow, what a rollicking success this is. smAsho staff, we're waiting for you to spruce up the sites. Get on it, or I got news for you, smAsho staff. You made it cheddar and you're fired, okay? Fired, cheddar, cheddar. smashamash.com/forum is not made in cheddar, by the way. Here's the weather.gov map, and I would note how hot it is, right? Are you worried about global warming, folks? Oh my gosh, the planet's so hot that it's cold. It's June 8th's weather.gov map, and you see this? That's a winter weather advisory for a large portion of the northern Rockies. You see that? That is a... the hell is that? Is that a hard freeze watch? I don't even know what that is. They don't even have this color in the key. Oh, it's a freeze warning. See all these dark purple areas here, folks? That is a freeze warning. We're less than 2 weeks from summertime, and the planet's so hot that it's cold. By the way, climate change is real. It has nothing to do with carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is the most important trace gas in the world. It's at the bottom of every single food chain with the exception of extremophiles on the planet, including the one that's keeping you alive. Next, looking at nullschool.net's jet streams, there's where the jet streams are located in the Eastern world. And by the way, it's going to be a very cold day right here because there's air blowing due south from the North Geographic Pole, where it's cold even in the summertime. Next, we'll look at the western jets. And you see extreme meridional jet stream flow once again, making for very, very cold times in places like Newfoundland, as Arctic air is injected down there also. Meanwhile, you hear idiotic articles about how, oh no, there's only 9 feet of snow from coast to coast in Greenland. It's melting, because hot air is being injected up there. Similar to the hot air that comes out of people's mouths, people like Al Gore, James Hansen, Michael Mann, etc. People who will just outright lie to you about the way atmospheric physics works and get paid 6 figures to do so. Next, looking at windy.com's pressure maps. We're going to let this advance into the GFS forecast to show you where we expect pressure cells to be. At noon tomorrow. By the way, we're planning another episode of the Diamond Anvil Too Hard to Smash tomorrow, so look for that tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow, June 9th. There's where we expect pressure cells to be according to the GFS forecast at 12 noon tomorrow. Next we'll look at water vapor maps for Europe and Oceania. Water vapor maps for the Far East, Europe and Oceania. Not Europe and Oceania, Europe and Africa. Next we'll look at Australia and Oceania and the Far East and so on. There's the water vapor map for that area. Next, we'll look at lightningmaps.org. Lightningmaps.org. Next time you hear thunder, check it out. It's a good time. We've got some lightning here, striking places like Fargo, right in the center of town. Hey, Fargo, there's thunder rolling in. Next, we'll look at the U.S. Doppler radar map to see this hurricane situation. You can see some counterclockwise rotation there. I don't know if it weakened or it strengthened because I'm not doing meteorology videos yet, although I might start once I go full time. Please support the channel via the links below the video. Some pretty heavy storms are over North and South Dakota and Minnesota, as well as snow falling all around northern Nevada, Utah, the Northern Rockies, Idaho, etc. Next, we'll look at water vapor map for the U.S. And you can see once again that this hurricane or tropical storm or whatever it is now is all surrounded by dry air. There's no pipeline for moisture to get sucked into that system. So while it's going to stagnate and flood these areas, because of the way the jet stream is working, you see the jet stream is coming like this, and all this dry mass of air is just going to keep it stuck in that area. It's not going to be able to move north. It's going to move more and more slowly. And let's take a look at this close-up view of the Minnesota, South Dakota sort of area. And by the way, if you see all these lines here that are parallel, they're not chemtrails, they're not contrails, and they're not HARP. What they are Hall current streamer lines, which are perpendicular to the mode of motion of the water. So you see this water is moving this way, and all these perpendicular lines are this way. That's called the Hall effect, folks. It's when magnetic fields come out of electricity, or electricity comes out of magnetic fields at a 90-degree angle. A prime example of it there. Wow, that is a really good one. And let's move on to thank the smAsho team for tuning in. Recommend that you stay tuned for bonus features. Please share on your social media and help increase the probability that we'll get over 1,600 subscribers one of these centuries. Here's the latest refresh of the intensity gram, and you can see how that sunspot has weakened. The trailing umbra are barely even umbra anymore. And the leading sunspot has shrunk and degraded a little bit as well. Sunspot 2765, we expect it to continue to degrade. Here's the latest refresh of the fields. And you can see practically zero magnetic mixing associated with either the main leading umbra or the trailing umbrae. And let's close things out with a, I don't know, how about let's do a 1700 angstroms view here. Let's do a close-up. And there's a 48-hour SDO video in 1700 angstroms. And that sunspot has certainly shrunk. So anyway, we're out. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, stare at the sun, don't drink, and if you do, don't drive. Thanks for leaving a comment, Ms. Creighton. And since it'll never be now again, welcome to the Neo Renaissance. May that solar wind be at your back. And may all forms of idiocy be absent from your universe.